Billy's got a grin like glass. Huey's handshake by the back door. Mother's milk keeps the score. Frenchie smells the blood before it starts. Home lettuce mile cuts clean like a knife in a magazine. Spread starlights trying to stay human in a house full of dead eyes.
Evening. Daddy's home.
And the cameras always lie till the walls stop breathing. You can hear the city flinch when
Well.
the saints stop pretending.
With The Boys finally wrapped up and Thought Rising coming out next year, I think it's time we talk a little bit about the comics that inspired it all. So, it's 2005. You have this idea of, what if superheroes were complete and total jerks? If somebody really had superpowers, what if on the outside that they, of course, do the right thing? They're celebrities, they're athletes, they're movie stars. So, Garth Ennis and his co-creator, David Robertson, who also did the artwork for the series, decided, let's turn it into a series. First being an imprint of Wildstorm for the first 6 issues, which, for those of you who don't know, Wildstorm was a DC imprint that included a lot of characters like Deathblow and Grifter and some of the other that would later become Image comic characters. Although now Wildstorm is back in DC, although Wildstorm isn't officially back. Whole weird thing about that. But anyway, first 6 issues were part of Wildstorm's imprint until DC caught wind of what Garth Ennis was planning for the series and thought it was a little too extreme for them, so they decided to cancel it before issue 7. But then Dynamite Entertainment came in and decided, hey, we'll take the series and we'll continue it. So now it's all collected into Dynamite Entertainment's catalog, and right here is Omnibus Volume 1 of 6. I only have volumes 1 and 2 because these things are pretty expensive. But as you can tell, for this one, got it at a convention a few years ago, so it was only $8. So in this omnibus comes issues 1 through 14, with the stories being In the Name of the Game, Cherry, Get Some, and The Glorious 5-Year Plan. So it encompasses a lot of the beginnings of, the natural story of establishing the boys' team, and gain some insight into the world of Vought and superheroes. Not just the main ones being the 7, but also the lower tier teams that were formed that we don't really get to see a whole lot of from the actual show The Boys. So, the story begins on a beautiful sunny day. Everything's going great. We see the glorious superheroes flying across the air. People looking up, excited, in awe, saying it's the 7, world's greatest superheroes. But then we see this man, sitting on a park bench, with his ever so adorable French bulldog, Terry, looking up with a smile that doesn't quite reach his face, as he says, I'm going to have. And he calls him the C word. And decides to get off the park bench and head off. This is William Butcher, although friends call him Billy Butcher. And we're about to find out what exactly he's talking about. Then we cut to Glasgow, Scotland, where we meet Huey and his girlfriend Robin at a festival, having a good time while Huey's sharing a funny anecdote about something he found out about aliens. Robin finds it funny when Huey says the phrase jinx, which is like jinkies, or like, geez, can't believe that happened. Finds it funny that he's the only man that she knows to use the word jinx like that, and says she loves him for it. Huey asks her, say that again, dropping I love you 3 months into their relationship. Robin's, of course, a little worried, thinking like, oh, wait, did I say that too soon? Huey says, no, not at all. And says for the first time in his life, things seem to be going right. And as they're about to share this beautiful romantic kiss, all of a sudden there's this blur that comes across. This massive soup hits the wall with this other superhero from the force of this other superhero. Huey's left confused. Where's Robin? He looks down. He's holding her severed hands in complete shock. That's right. His girlfriend got pancaked. Also interesting to note, Huey's design here is much different because he was modeled after Simon Pegg. Huey, of course, is traumatized by what happened, and Vaught's PR team tries to come to him to be able to sell out some sort of check, some sort of non-disclosure agreement, something to keep things under wraps. One of the things I liked about the scene that's depicted in the comic, which was a little hard for me to read at first because I didn't exactly know what was going on, is we see these different thought bubbles or different bubbles of the Vaught team saying their standard sort of, hey, listen, we don't want anything bad to happen. It's not like people were married. The typical, like, I'm sorry for your loss. But the reason why it's so disjointed and there's all these things happening is because it's from Huey's perspective where he's just a complete and total wreck. And he just doesn't know what to do. So all this stuff is coming to him in the sense of like, he's just lost. He's a broken man. William Butcher finds out about Huey from his old CIA director, Rayner, after they have a little intimacy together. Or mutual kind of deal for information. Basically, he does it to get his team back together to knock down the Supes again. And of course, Butcher recruits his old team, including Mother's Milk, the female, and Frenchie. And yes, that's all that the female is referred to as the female. We never learned her name. The name Kimiko was something that was created for the show because you got to give her a name because she's part of the team and give her a more fleshed out backstory. That's one of the downsides to the comic that I can say is a lot of characters aren't as fleshed out as others are. Like Butcher gets fleshed out pretty well, Huey gets fleshed out well, and so does Mother's Milk later on. But as far as Frenchie and the female, they really don't. In fact, it's even hint to that Frenchie might not actually be French, that he is actually from the UK and that he's putting on a kind of act, a sort of performance, because Frenchie in the comic is way more of a French stereotype than in the actual TV show. Another thing to note is a lot of the members of the team actually do have superpowers. Now, this is explained later on when Huey is doing surveillance and Butcher comes back from another visit from his friend Rayner and gets some Compound V that he injects into Huey right away. Now, this particular strain of Compound V isn't as potent as the regular, brand because, well, it doesn't really give him any specific powers other than durability and super strength. That's about it. It's more like a weaker strand, but still, it's Compound V at the end of the day. Now, probably wondering, it's like, well, why if they're after taking out Supes? And the reason for it being is Butcher points out that, hey, these are superheroes we're taking on. People that will punch your head off with probably just one punch. So they need to have something to give them a little bit of leveling the playing field so that way they can at least go toe-to-toe with some of them. And Frenchie's powers is he's a good tracker, so he can smell really well. And as we found out with Mother's Milk, his whole backstory is way different than in the show. In fact, his name isn't Marvin Milk. In the comics, his real name is Byron Wells. And one second, my kids are yelling one minute, so let me take her. Sorry, kids are yelling in the background, tough being a parent. Their first mission is to take on and blackmail the Team Teenage Kicks, which is this universe's parody of the Teen Titans, or the younger generation of new superheroes. Now, the reason why they're going after the lower tier teams, well, because one, it will be a pretty dumb plan to take on the 7 right away. But also they want Vaught and the Seven to know, oh, we're back, and we mean business. So while blackmailing or looking on the team Teenage Kicks, we meet some of the roster of that team, with the leader being Big Game, Larney Cock, which, yes, that's his name. That's who we meet as far as Teenage Kicks wise. Now, as they're blackmailing the team, looking on, surveilling them, they find the usual typical debauchery of them doing some recreational activities. And they send in the pictures saying, hey, either sell out one of your team or we're going to release all of this. So the team struggles and tries to figure out, okay, well, who's somebody that can actually survive PR or who's somebody that we can throw under the bus so that way, at least we can save face. So they decide to throw under the bus the leader, Big Game, because he is gay. And decide, okay, well, that's something he can survive. That's something that they can, spin of like, okay, everything's fine. But then somebody sends a message to Teenage Kicks about the team that actually blackmailed them. So they come across the boys and we get the first big fight and find out that they're not the best team, as some of them get taken out pretty easily. And one of the big things that happens is Huey is fighting Larneycock, and by complete total accident, not meaning to, because the Compound V finally kicked in Huey's system, punches Larneycock straight through the chest, killing him, leaving his fist stuck within his chest, and having Kamiko and some of the other guys to help pull him off. And Huey is obviously traumatized by what just happened. So it's interesting that Huey's first kill of a superhero is unintentional, whereas in the show, Huey means it. Huey means to kill the suit because he's still dealing with a lot of grief, a lot of trauma of what's happened to him. Much like Huey is still dealing with a lot of stuff in the story, although it's not really as prominent. So it's one of the things that the show does a little better. In fact, you'll find me saying as we go throughout the series, stuff that the show did better than. Meanwhile, as all this is happening, the Seven has a new member on their team after the retirement of their former member, Lamplighter. Now, Lamplighter, we don't really find out a whole lot about what his power level is, but we get the idea that he's sort of the Green Lantern or Pyro stand-in or pastiche of the team. And in January, who is modeled a little bit after Dazzler, maybe a little bit of Jubilee. I could be wrong on that, but that's the vibe I got with her. Even though her costume design is definitely more of Miss Marvel. Not Miss Marvel from, Marvel, but from DC as part of the Shazam family. So she's excited. She's this young hero that was part of this old team called the Young Americans that's now in the big leagues. She meets the team's leader, Homelander, who at first is very pleasant, very nice, showing her around, taking her to the big office. But things go south pretty quick when he wants her to do something very gross. So her obviously being horrified by this is like, what are you doing? So tries to leave, but then comes A-Train and Black Noir. Now, at first she thinks like, oh, thank goodness you're here. Something's going on with Homelander. But then they also proceed to want her to do something gross as well. And well, Annie not wanting to go back to the Young Americans and lose a big opportunity, well, she does it. Yeah, that's the thing that's also messed up in the series is whenever they want to go with shock and awe, they hit you in the face with it pretty quick, which seems like it's shock and awe just for the sake of being shock and awe, for the sake of being gross. Yeah, this series does not pull any punches. So, after that, which thank goodness we don't focus on a whole lot of, we find out that the Seven are aware of what's going on with the boys and what's going on with the lower tier teams, but aren't exactly sure what to do about it because they haven't really targeted them directly. So it's a lot of them basically being like, hey, we know this is happening. We're not going to draw too much attention to ourselves. So after that, Huey is still contemplating on whether or not he wants to stay with the team because of how intense things are getting, and him thinking that he's not cut out for this. So he sits on the park bench. Butcher comes to talk to him or visit with him, and Huey asks him, why is he even doing all this? But he gets, yeah, these people are messed up, but why go after these people? And that's when Butcher drops a bombshell of his wife Becca, who was assaulted by one of the Supes and who died in a pretty messed up way. And that he's after this team's leader, Homelander, because Homelander did. That's why he wants to take down the Supes. And he wants Huey to be there with him to kind of be like his conscience, to help pull him back when, things go a little too rough. And also, as he states, he said he always wanted a little brother. So, we cut ahead to Huey and Butcher visiting a comic shop to meet up with an old informant called The Legend. Now, The Legend in the world of The Boys comics is a comic creator who comes up with a lot of the stories for a lot of the superheroes. Mainly, a lot of their missions that are watered down and that are glorified or a little fancier than what actually happened to, sell books and to keep their squeaky clean image. Now, I was trying to figure out, who The Legend was modeled after, but I get the idea that he was supposed to be modeled after certain comic creators like Jack Kirby and Stan Lee. At least that's the vibe I got from them. So he gives information about the death of a young superhero that was also covered up. Because, well, the young superhero was gay and nobody wanted to cover the story. Yeah, this gets a little messed up because this was still in early 2000s and a lot of that stuff, unfortunately, is still going on. But wants them to investigate Swingwing, who was an old sidekick of the superhero Tech Knight. And then we get introduced to Tech Knight. Now, Tech Knight in the comics, although not so much in the show, we get the idea that he's meant to be like a Batman sort of parody, but we never actually fully see, a lot of what he does. And he has superpowers in the show, whereas in the comic, he's one of the few Supes that doesn't have any powers. And that he's modeled a little bit after Batman, obviously, but also a lot more Iron Man with his mech suit that he has. And we get that, and we get an insight of Tech Knight going through something pretty messed up where he has this uncontrollable urge to do things with holes. Yeah. And the thing is, unlike some Supes who are just made deprived and wanting to do these acts because they want to, he actually is horrified by the fact that he's doing this and that it's almost this uncontrollable urge that he has. And he gets kicked off of his team, payback, and basically gets his career destroyed whenever his butler leaves and outs him. So his career is basically destroyed. But unlike some of the other Supes, he actually dies doing a good thing, where he died saving a mom and her baby from this construction site vehicle that's about to run them down. So he does die a hero. And then we later find out in the autopsy, he had this tumor that was developing in his brain about the size of a golf ball that was, pressing against his brain that kind of acted on the impulse of him wanting to do these, messed up things. So, yeah, he's one of the few Supes that actually is all in all a decent guy. Well, aside from him being homophobic. But in the world of The Boys, you gotta take the good that you get. But he does give some information about Swingwing and where he last saw him and why he dropped him. So the boys find, or Huey and Butcher find Swingwing and find out the reason why he killed this young guy was because even though in his PR team he's an advocate for, gay people and people within the LGBTQIA community, on the outside he doesn't care and thinks very less of them. In fact, to the point where he admits he didn't mean to push this young person off the roof, killing him. just because the fact that they were gay. Now, at first, Butcher seems uncharacteristically lets him go, but we later find out he took a very particular piece of the guy's suit off. And that we find later in the news that his suit had a malfunction and he died crashing down. And then we jump ahead to Russia, where a lot of the lower tier suits are gathering together to start like a big coup, to start like a big sort of massive, let's take over Russia. But we find out that they are injected with a particular compound, V-strand, that when someone has a detonator, can make all their heads explode. And there we meet the boy's other informant, who was a former superhero, Love Sausage. And there's a reason why it's called Love Sausage. And one of the things I like in the comic, in the show, whereas Love Sausage in the show is depicted as stereotypical villain, Russian villain. In the comics, he's actually, again, a good guy, that he's best friends with the boys and develops this pretty, wholesome friendship with Huey. After Huey, inadvertently drinks his special made vodka, which is actually made out of jet fuel. And in a funny scene with the other boys, once, Love Sausage pours them all around, Huey's the only one that takes a shot, while everyone else, except for Love Sausage, of course, gets rid of theirs, like throwing it behind them or in a plant, that kind of deal. So we meet another person that's trying to, take over, and she's equally messed up, and how she goes out is pretty intense. And after, the mission's done, after they basically foiled, whatever their plan was, Butcher decides that that's not enough. So, going in alone with a detonator in his hand, shouting out to the masked group of superheroes, they all turn, and before they could even lay a hand on Butcher, Butcher activates the detonator. All their heads explode, while he's humming Ode to Joy. And then the last thing that we see is we get to see a quick peek at the man who runs Vought, Stan Stillwell. And we find out he's not afraid to tell Homelander to handle the situation and to grow up. Yeah, so that's basically a bridge version of what happens in the first volume of the series. Now, there's a lot more stories that, later on down the road, and a lot more that happens in this that I didn't really cover, but I just wanted to give a brief insight as to what happens within the first volume. Now, my thoughts are on the boys comic as a whole is it's a fun series, but also it feels like it's shocking just for the sake of being shocking, which is fine. I like, a lot of fun, stories, a lot of out there crazy stories, but I still think the show does a lot better because, the social commentary that they have, and that it seems to be better written. No offense to Garth Ennis and Eric Robertson, because they did create a fun series. But overall, that's my thoughts on Volume 1 of The Boys. If you have read the comics or read the volume, or you've only seen the show and want to check out the comic for yourself, I recommend it.